We'll get started in a minute. And thanks everyone for joining us. It's a little, I know, depending on where you are in the world right now, it's a little late for some of us, a little early for others. So thank you. And I think we'll get started. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today for the Physics and Astronomy Sea Change webinar series I've been cultivating. I'm the project manager, Alexis Knob. And this is going to be an exciting day. This is the first one of 2021. And I'm pleased to announce Dr. Clazel Mathis, who's going to talk to us about culturally relevant pedagogy in post-secondary education. If you have questions, please either send a message in the chat to the panelists and I'll eventually ask those when it's time, or you can go with the Q&A. Yeah, I think that's about it. Clazel, take it over.
Thank you for the introduction, Alexis. First, I want to thank everyone for attending the talk. Additionally, I want to thank Sea Change and the AAPT for inviting me and promoting the event. The first thing I will do is introduce myself. Again, my name is Clazel Mathis, and the title of my talk is Culturally Relevant Pedagogy in Post-Secondary Education. And in this presentation, I will give tips for faculty who want to pursue culturally relevant approaches in their instruction. And to give a background of myself and how I came to this work, when I was in graduate school, I took a course. I can't remember the title of the course for some reason, but I ran across a paper about culturally relevant pedagogy. And I told my major professor, and I was like, could this be done in the physics classroom? And she said, sure, probably. And so from there, we started developing my dissertation, which focused on working with a high school physics teacher and helping her transition to being more culturally relevant in her instruction. And I want to highlight that when I say being more culturally relevant, and the reason I highlight that is because when people think of culturally relevant pedagogy, they just view classroom actions such as teaching in a certain way, but it's actually more than that. And I will go into that more during this talk. But culturally relevant pedagogy encompasses many nuances within the classroom, within teachers just outside of just classroom teaching. And so to go back to what I did during my dissertation study, I worked with a high school teacher where we developed lessons and reflected on ideas in which we used students' cultural information and resources and applied it to the teacher's instruction. Ultimately, the experience was very good. And then from there, I developed an outline of the attributes teachers should have when being what I call a culturally relevant pedagogue, and the challenges that they may encounter when transitioning to that type of instruction. My experiences in graduate school led me to where I'm at now at the University of Washington as a postdoc, where one of the projects that I work on is focusing on equitable instruction of energy ideas in the physics classroom. And this involves me working with physics teachers on developing practices and ideas that are equitable to them. And some of the equitable-based teaching approaches are referred to from the culturally relevant framework. And so with that said, let's get started with the talk. Now, the case for culturally relevance in physics. Now, when you look at physics education from both a historical and current perspective, there are many groups of learners who are underrepresented in physics. In many high schools around the country, students are either not exposed to physics because they're not required to take it, or they're tracked out of the discipline for a variety of factors, such as the perception of physics. Maybe teachers, parents, and guidance counselors may not necessarily be confident in certain students to enroll in physics, or there's just no access to offer it because the school doesn't offer it. In the past, I was an adjunct professor at a local community college, and I recall sometimes there was one or two students in the class who were not in high school, who were still in high school taking the course, and I asked them how they were able to take physics, and they told me the school didn't offer it. And so their parents pushed them into dual enrollment at a local college. And so this goes to show there are a myriad of factors behind the issue of underrepresentation. Additionally, there are stereotypes and biases people deal with, in particular for people of color, students of color, and that they feel the pressure of the imposter syndrome, where they either have to prove that they are extra capable, or they just shy away from participating. Now, all these factors have an impact on students who want to pursue a career in physics or physics-related fields, in that they have not been given the experience and the discipline, which may cause an overwhelming experience in a college setting by taking it for the first time. There was an article by a professor at FSU, Florida State, named Paul Cottle, who he talked about how the Black participation in engineering at Florida State was declining because of the lack of experience in physics had a large role in doing and affecting that. And given that these issues, I think there's something that needs to be done to rectify this problem. There are several ways to address it, and the primary two ways I believe are: one, you can attempt to increase the participation in physics during high school, be it make it mandatory or encourage more students to enroll, or two, adjust the type of instruction given to the students to increase participation in the field. And so for today's talk, I'm going to focus on number two, which is adjusting the instruction. And I call for teachers to become more culturally relevant in their approach to instruction. And what I mean by that is understanding the culture of the university, students, and take as much information as you can from that and incorporate that into your teaching. Ideally, if teachers and faculty are to embrace this type of instruction, it can aid in the problems of underrepresentation in physics. Now, significance. Now, introducing culturally relevant pedagogy in physics is significant in several ways. First, it gives a new approach to instruction that can influence negative factors impacting performance. The intent of culturally relevant pedagogy is to show students that they bring something of value to the classroom that can be used to influence their learning of physics. By students having an awareness of this, it can potentially increase interest, motivation, and performance in physics. The second, this shed lights on teachers' approaches using culturally relevant pedagogy in the classroom. Currently, the research on culturally relevant pedagogy is very scant, and particularly with case studies of teachers who have tried to use it. Third, it gives further examples of multicultural STEM education, which is greatly needed in the literature. Some additional things I want to bring up are, one, culturally relevant pedagogy can be used across varying levels, from the K through 12 to the university level. Additionally, it is designed to connect students to canonical ideas, in our case, physics ideas, through cultural norms. Now, the challenge many have is, how do you define what is a cultural norm? To address this, I go by a quote by Nato, a scholar named by the last name of Nato. He gave a comprehensive definition of culture. Now, however, depending on the scholar or whatever dictionary you want to read, you'll have a different perception of culture. And additionally, there's always this association with connecting race, class, and culture, which is not necessarily true on all situations. And so my point in making this is that when you look at culture, it can vary from person to person, or teacher to teacher, scholar to scholar. Now, conceptions related to culturally relevant pedagogy with associated classroom practices. Now, when examining the development of culturally relevant pedagogy, it was developed by a lady named Gloria Ladson Billings, and she did it through working with teachers who she deemed were successful teachers of African-American students. In that, she noticed that the teachers had three unique attributes. The first attribute was conception of self and others. The conception of self and others focuses on four principles that are: all students can achieve academic excellence, they are willing to change their practice over time, they're willing to learn about the culture of their students, and they view teaching as a way of giving back to their students. Now, the second attribute the teachers had was certain conceptions of knowledge. And those conceptions are that knowledge is constructed, revised, and recycled, or that you must embrace a critical approach to what you consider knowledge, and that you are keen to scaffolding and building bridges for students to learn. Now, culturally relevant pedagogy is considered constructivist pedagogy, where there's a view that knowledge is created and not necessarily found external from the mind. Now, the third attribute is having good social relations, which consist of establishing good relationships with students, promoting collaboration and accountability, and developing a community of learners. And so the point Latson-Billings was trying to make with these propositions was that in order to be what I deem a culturally relevant pedagogue, you must have these conceptions. And when teachers have these conceptions, their practice can translate into the major pillars of culturally relevant pedagogy, which are listed on the next slide, which are the first one being academic excellence. And academic excellence focuses on establishing high standards along with encouraging students to have a critical approach to learning and knowledge. And this can be through engaging in critique of text and activity. For example, there was a piece in The Physics Teacher by Eugene Hecht that discussed errors in the kinetic energy equation, stating that it can only be used for low speed approximations, and that we should caution using that to define energy as a whole. And so examples like this can be used by instructors to encourage students to have a more critical approach to learning. In addition, instructors should encourage an environment where students are intrinsically motivated to pursue academic excellence. So other examples of achieving academic excellence are addressing real world issues, using opinions and existing knowledge, and developing tasks that draw on students' abilities. The second pillar is cultural competence, which is helping students recognize and honor their cultural beliefs and practices. Now, this could be done through choosing materials that relate to students' lives, developing personal relationships with students, and giving opportunities for students to share their personal experiences. One last thing is that teachers should value the cultural resources students bring to the classroom. And culturally relevant pedagogy emphasizes that a student learning should not come at the expense of their cultural identity. There is this view that a lot of students who are educated coming from marginalized backgrounds have to sort of sacrifice their cultural identity to achieve certain things. And so culturally relevant pedagogy sort of speaks against that. The third pillar is social political consciousness. And this involves encouraging students to have a critical approach to injustices that may impact their culture through the classroom teaching. And this could be creating discussions about controversial topics, allowing social issues to drive the instruction, and asking students to give their viewpoint on critical issues. Now, generally, educators have difficulties with social political consciousness because of two things. Either one, they may not necessarily have a social political consciousness of their own, or two, it may seem difficult to incorporate social political issues into their practice. And so to implement social political consciousness, teachers, instructors, faculty, they must develop the consciousness of the larger social, economic, and political issues within themselves that impact their surroundings. And so over the next few slides, I want to talk about aspects of culturally relevant pedagogy I found in working with teachers, one particularly with a female teacher that I've worked with. The first aspect of culturally relevant pedagogy I've noticed was that teachers allowed students to discuss social political topics. So during my work with a high school teacher, we worked together on developing lessons that highlighted students' cultural concerns, ideas, and norms. And one thing that the teacher allowed to students to do at times, not necessarily all the time, but at times, was allow them to address social political topics. So for example, now at the time, there was a big focus on race and classism. And so there was a time in the class where students had a chance to discuss, students of color had a chance to discuss on how they felt about being looked down upon for attending a majority Black school or majority Black college. They talked about how there was a perception that their courses were not necessarily as challenging. They talked about how they experienced microaggressions. They talked about how they felt that many people felt they didn't earn their role in college because of because there may have been a product or of an affirmative action quota. And so my point in saying this is that the teacher established good relationships with the students by allowing them to be themselves. And additionally, the teacher at times talked about his or her experience dealing with these issues. And so overall, the teacher supported students in seeing their own conceptions of certain issues, if this particular issue, race, and allowed them to express their opinions productively. Another circumstance was when there was a gun rally at the school. There was a rally at the school for gun safety. And it was about 2019 or 2020, I believe. And the teacher thought it was a good idea to create a project where students develop physics-based arguments on why certain firearms should or should not be used. So students had to discuss the different firearms, it's the different firearms muzzle velocity, impact force, and impulse. And the teacher believed that was a clever way that she felt was culturally relevant, in that she identified issues that the students were passionate about that related to their culture and connected it to physics ideas. Another case was when the teacher, was a situation when a teacher asked the students to develop a plan on how to supply energy for your local neighborhood. Students had to describe the different ways energy was made, examine the costs and the benefits of each method. And so in that, students learned about solar, wind, electric energy, while learning about how electromagnetic induction works. They learned about generators, motors, and how solar cells work. And so these were clever, creative ways that the teacher used to use students' cultural dynamics and apply it to physics ideas. And so the second major aspect I noticed is that the teachers were able to adapt to student strengths. So for example, there was a teacher who I watched. I noticed many of her students liked art. Well, she said many of her students liked art. So she thought of two clever projects. One project was the students had to build a rocket out of old soda bottles, excuse me, and they had to measure the time of flight, and thus they had to determine the initial angle, the final angle, the force applied, and other quantities for the projectile. The second thing was the students had to build different types of amusement park rides, such as roller coasters, and each person had to create a brochure that explained the energy usage of the objects in motions. So students were describing the kinetic and the potential energy at different points on the ride. And we can look at this way as sort of an energy tracking model for different points in the object's motions. And so these were just clever ways that, you know, she used students' cultural strengths and applied it to physics ideas. And then the third attribute was that there was a consistent push towards academic excellence. And so this was done using multiple methods. This was done several ways. So one thing was the teacher used multiple methods of instruction, such as group discussions, demo, lecture, quizzes. And so there was never a consistent way of teaching, which helped the students and kept them excited on what to learn next. Also, there were many times where she had group activities where students had to solve problem sets as a group. There were group projects where students could help each other out. And one thing I want to mention was that culturally relevant pedagogy involves being able to elicit student ideas. And so as an instructor, you need to understand what students know in order to connect the learning gaps to achieve the learning goals. And the teacher was able to do that. Also, the teacher was able to encourage a critical analysis, which was important in the sense that she wanted students to think deeply about what was taught to them. And so with that said, teachers should probe students in helping them think about new ideas and challenge their pre-existing ideas on physics ideas. Also, the teacher gave congratulations, which was good. If a student was awarded something, the student was recognized, and that was helpful in establishing relationships between them. And also, the teacher gave advice, gave good mentorship. Some other subtle aspects of CRP was that she was very knowledgeable of the students' names. She was called on underrepresented populations strategically, and she didn't have any isolation of any students. Now, challenges in using culturally relevant pedagogy in physics. Now, during the times I've worked with teachers, they've expressed challenges, and some challenges are, the first set of challenges are political in the sense that the curricula, physics curricula that is very expansive, and it's very tough to have a depth analysis of ideas. And so usually there are responsibilities either sanctioned by the institution or the department that may inhibit the use or the maximal use of CRP. And so this is a challenge that many teachers who are interested in doing culturally relevant pedagogy have to navigate. Depending on the circumstance, the class size, and the support you have, you may have to sometimes gradually introduce scenarios, be it projects, class discussions, problem sets that are related to students' culture in order to get them to get used to doing a CRP type of instruction. I would recommend doing this in sporadic times for faculty, college faculty, or giving students additional materials that they can use outside of class. The second challenge is that there is resistance to discussing social political issues, given the potentially polarizing nature of social political topics and the very limited experiences many have in the application of this to physics ideas to address these issues. There may be resistance when a teacher's attempts to discuss or make reference to them not being able to go more into the depth of the ideas. And so I recommend, as a way to address these challenges, instructors, faculty could work with department heads or develop community of practices to get with the communities of practice with teachers at maybe different institutions, and they don't necessarily have to be physics teachers, to sort of get a feel for what they're comfortable with addressing. And there are also pedagogical challenges teachers face from developing lessons. This could be through coming up with ideas to connect students' culture to physics ideas. And you can address this by gathering information about the students at the beginning of the year, what their interests are, what their things that they value. In addition, there's also challenges in managing classroom discourse at times. So for example, when teachers want to sort of elicit student ideas and see where they are, either through trying to engage with them during sense making or trying to manage discourse among the students, there could be challenges. And then lastly, teachers can have difficulty in managing moments of uncertainty in students. So this is evident if a student had a difficulty with a particular concept. The teacher can have difficulty being patient with the student and or necessarily maybe giving the student sort of the answer, or maybe not necessarily having the patience to allow the students to figure it out on their own. And with culturally relevant pedagogy, we want the students to sort of take ownership of their learning approach. And so to address this, teachers need to have effective scaffolding techniques or strategies to help with that. There are also conceptual challenges in that it is tough to support student agency due to time constraints. And so this would involve teachers being a little bit more responsive to students in the problem solving and understanding of concepts. Given that teachers have so much to do, or faculty have so much to do, there are challenges to helping students become more ownership, like I said in the last slide, become what I call more epistemic agents over their learning. Additionally, many students are accustomed to a certain type of didactic type of instruction, whereas culturally relevant pedagogy encourages more student ownership of learning and agency. And so this could be something that both students could get adjusted to and faculty. There are cultural dilemmas in that the teachers may not necessarily be aware or accustomed to the varying cultural dynamics of their students. And this could be of values, language, interest. And this is a lot more common than people think, particularly at the university level. And so when there are cultural disconnects, it may take more time to be to adjust to this type of framework or this type of teaching. And lastly, there are challenges in teachers readjusting to their roles. So given that teachers are accustomed to teaching in a certain type of way, to a more student-centered approach, this may be challenging for them. And so, as I mentioned in the earlier slides, the solution to this is to develop a community of practice among the teachers where you discuss challenges, approaches to exchanging ideas on how to address them. And so also it's good to talk to people who have attempted to do it before. And it doesn't necessarily have to be physics teachers, it could be teachers in other disciplines. And so to give an overview of the talk, final recap, there are a few things that teachers need to do in order to be incorporate culturally relevant pedagogy. The first thing is to be open to discussing social political concerns. In doing that, teachers should reflect on their previous conceptions and encourage students to do so. And this involves having discussions on these types of topics because many teachers and students enter the classroom with previous conceptions of others, of themselves, be it ones that are implicit or explicit. Also, teachers must have support from administrators. So having discussions of controversial issues in the classroom tends to be effective when there's support from administrators in the preparation and the appropriate management of discourse. Also, teachers must allow a diverse view among the students. Without the support from those administrators, though, there's a high probability there will be struggles within this aspect of culturally relevant pedagogy. I know there are different curriculums that help with this. If for teachers that are not aware, that are not comfortable with this, there's an underrepresentation curriculum and others that can give you sort of a guide on how to, or a guide or a model on how to address these types of subjects or give the types of subjects to address. Teachers will need to value a student's cultural capital, and that means resisting devaluing students' culture. Additionally, teachers will need to establish a community of support, and this involves enhancing a communal learning experience, and this can be shown through students supporting each other by helping them understand ideas, helping students who may not necessarily feel comfortable expressing confusion. And so you need to have an atmosphere where they feel supported, or they feel some sort of community of support. And then teachers who want to use CRP in their classrooms will have a new approach to teaching. So they have to get adjusted. And so within that transition, there should be anticipation of challenges, or, there should be anticipation on understanding or encouraging student agency. And so the teachers will have to manage these moments of uncertainty with the students, and then helping students build upon their uncertainty within the curricula or problem sets and discourse. It's important for students to develop that. When students are challenged, teachers will need to give them strategies and gradually helping them become more comfortable with taking ownership of their learning. And also, teachers need to be patient and allow students to develop confidence in their sense making. In addition, teachers need to be sympathetic with the student challenges in the sense that students come to the classroom with different backgrounds and different approaches towards problem solving. And then for the last section, teachers will have to account for curricular constraints. So they may feel pressured to enact a standardized curricula to prepare students. So it's natural for them not to focus on allowing students to struggle through those moments of uncertainty. And so on top of that, there are factors that may inhibit the level or the depth at which teachers can address physics ideas or social political concerns and other things based on those curricular restraints. And so teachers must assess which social political concerns to address. So the whole aspect of social political consciousness has been a struggle for teachers, particularly in physics and all STEM fields who attempt to use a culturally relevant pedagogy. And so there may be circumstances where teachers may or may not want to address these concerns. And so given the climate now, there may be times where, you may have to shy away from doing certain things, or there may be times where you can. So it's kind of a teacher's pick or choose how they want to go about doing that. I would like to thank, this is my final slide, I would like to thank, again, C-Change, the American Association of Physics Teachers, who invited me to speak, and the people who promoted my event, American Journal of Physics. Also like to thank my research team at the University of Washington, who was helpful in furthering doing my research, and the advisors at Florida State University, where this work began. I think there's a lot of work that can be done with this from a professional development, student learning, and teaching perspective. So if there's anyone's interested in working with me, you can contact me. My email's on the slide. And so I have some papers coming out, one in the physics teacher, sort of a practitioner piece on, what teachers need to use if they want to do culturally relevant pedagogy in the classroom. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Clazel. If anybody has any questions, please type them in the chat or in the Q&A. The first question is, can you share your slides with us, please?
Sure, I can share them. Like share them right now or share them at some point down the road?
Eventually this will get uploaded to the AAPT YouTube channel. So if Clazel, you have like a Google Drive doc or something, or you want to have your slides as a PDF, I can send them out to the attendees because everyone registered and I have their email addresses. Cool. And the next question is, do you have suggestions for surveys that assess students' cultural knowledge pre and post a classroom term project? Yeah, then I'm initiating, this is somebody who's initiating in the class, a project that involves race, colonialism, and physics.
I don't have a survey. Now, I have given a survey before, but I don't have it's not like a public survey or anything like that, or something validated. So I don't have suggestions for surveys that you can just go online and look, but I have something that I can share that I've done in the past with teachers.
As a follow-up, do you have like are there particular ways people evaluate things, like types of, maybe not a survey, like a standardized survey, but like the kinds of things people look for in this kind of work?
Well, there is, good question. There's what's called the culturally responsive teaching, well, no, excuse me, culturally responsive observation protocol, CRIOP. Culturally responsive interactive observation protocol. That could be used, but it's, the thing is with culturally relevant pedagogy, it's very, I'm not going to say vague. It's very, each discipline has a uniqueness to it. And so I don't think I guess the best way I'm saying is you may have to develop your own evaluation based on the literature for your own discipline, if that makes sense. But they do have the culturally responsive interactive protocol, which a lot of people use. That's the first thing that comes to mind. That's very common. And you can pull that up online somewhere. Or I can provide the link to that or provide the paper for that.
Yeah, I think that would be great if you could provide some, if you're willing to. I don't want to.
Yeah, so the thing is so that's generally for high school, elementary. There's not really a STEM focus on that. And so if you want to do it at the post-secondary education, you may have to sort of you may have to just adjust it to what you're trying to do, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So we have even more questions. Thank you. Would you mind talking a bit more about your experiences teaching at a community college and how you implemented culturally relevant pedagogy in that setting?
Well, I didn't implement it at that setting. I worked at a community college. This was prior to when I worked on my PhD. So I wasn't aware of culturally relevant pedagogy at that time, but I worked with high school settings, and I'm working with teachers now at a college setting. So I didn't do it at the community college level.
Could you do you have some ideas of maybe how that could work? I don't know, from your experience.
Yeah, I feel that, there's a lot of things in physics where you can address certain local issues. I brought up some with efficient energy usage. You can talk about issues of global warming, and that could be applied in the physics classroom. I talked about issues of the gun control thing. You can apply that in the physics classroom. So there's a lot of social political issues that, as an instructor, you can see what the students are passionate about, and you can use those and make connections to physics ideas doing that. And so also you can gather information, like I mentioned at the beginning, about students' values, students' cultural values, students' ideas, and see what information you can do to connect it with your physics classroom. I mean, with your curriculum.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. And how do you explore potential trigger issues? As an example, having a project on gun control, but then finding the student had been in an active shooter situation.
Well, that's always a question I've always asked. How do you do it? I don't know there is a blueprint on how to do that. At least I don't have one. My experience is if the students bring it up, or if it's brought up, then you can kind of follow through with it in a sense. So it's kind of a student-led type of thing. So if the students bring it up, then you can address the issue. Several students bring it up, then you can address the issues. So the issues that I brought up, that the examples that I gave in the presentation, most of them, all of them were student brought up in terms of the students had issues with the gun control issue. Students had issues with the global warming issue. Students had issues with the race climate. And so from there, that's how the teacher sort of brought it up. They let the students sort of bring it up, and then, you go from there. But in terms of approach to introducing it to the students, there's not really one. There is, like I said, I brought up the underrepresentation curriculum, and that kind of gives you a model on how to navigate the instruction or how to moderate the instruction. Think about what types of questions to ask, what to anticipate, those types of things. But the initiation is more, there's not necessarily a right time or a right approach to do it, if that makes sense. Or an ideal approach, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's so contextual. Mm. Do you think there are ways people can prepare themselves, as faculty or other types of educators for these kind of difficult conversations?
Well, prepare, that's a good word. I think that faculty just have to be aware. So, I mean, they have to be aware of the cultural dynamics at the university, the cultural dynamics in the class, because generally most faculty are only aware of the cultural dynamics interdepartmental with maybe with other faculty, maybe with other researchers, whatever the case is. But students at the university, there's cultural dynamics that go on there. There's cultural dynamics that happen in the community that may affect the school. And so I guess faculty just need to be a little bit more keen to that. Now, some are, I'm not saying none are, but some are, but then some aren't. And so the ones that aren't need to start becoming a little bit more keen to it. You know, when universities have town halls, be aware of that, or maybe listen to what's being talked about, or, you know, when students raise issues on campus, or the cases in the campus newspaper, just be aware of these issues. And so, because you can address these issues in the class, which could sort of impact students and maybe get them more motivated towards learning physics, or, you know, help motivate them to want to do better in physics, basically. So I think it's just a good thing that faculty should be aware. And it doesn't take much effort to do that. You know, I mean, I understand that faculty are busy and they have all things to do, but it still doesn't take much effort to do something like that.
Gotcha. And are there sort of like pitfalls people should be aware of if they want to try to implement something with culturally relevant pedagogy?
Well, I've never had a teacher who had a pitfall. So every teacher I've worked with had community support. Even the teachers I'm working with now, not community, but administrative support. And even the teachers I'm working with now have administrative support. So there could be pitfalls from the standpoint of, if you don't have support from your department, you don't have support from your, other colleagues, or the cases, it could get, depending on, you know, what you go over, how you go over it, there could be potential pitfalls. So as an instructor, you just have to be cognizant of what the dynamics are in your department, in your classroom, to see, you know, if it's doable or not.
Gotcha, that makes sense. And are there small ways people, if they today wanted to get started doing culturally relevant pedagogy? You know, you mentioned becoming more aware of what's going on in campus, the students' interests and whatnot. Are there other things people could do if, you know, they come away from this talk and are like, gee, I want to do this, but I don't want to make.
Yeah, just think about like what issues impact the university. Think about what issues impact the local community, and see, okay, is there anything that you can sort of come up with, like a case project or a small project, or maybe some problem sets, a homework assignment, extra credit, whatever the case is, to come up with some sort of way of getting the students to see, you know, how these issues impact the physics classroom, or how learning about these issues in the physics classroom can be utilized to help their communities, help their local cultures, whatever the case is. So think of just small little things. You can start with, like I said, just a extra credit assignment, or a project or something like that. And you can start from there.
Gotcha.
And see what the feedback is. If it's very good feedback and the students really liked it, you can try some more, and then just keep building from there.
And speaking of students, how do you handle, I just thinking about the work I do with change research, how do you handle student resistance? Because I imagine there's some students who are totally on board and love this kind of stuff, and some students won't.
I know, it depends. Like I said, I'm not sure. I've never had a situation where students really resisted. Because like I said, I've always done things from the thing is, I always allow all students to give their perspective. Even if it's contrary to what the mass says, you have to allow them to give their perspective, and you need to put that up front at the beginning. And if you do that, for the most part, you should not have any problems. The only problems come into play where the students may feel marginalized, or may not feel that their opinions are valued, or whatever the case is. So as long as you don't necessarily have students feeling isolated, then you should be fine. You should be fine.
Are there any more questions people have? Feel free to type them into the chat. Oh, there's one. Good. Where is it? Do you have examples of books, fiction or nonfiction, that incorporate social issues in physics?
I don't have any books. No, I don't have any books. I do have like the curriculum, the underrep curriculum. They have a very list of topics and stuff that well, now they kind of expanded to science, but originally it was for physics. And so you can go to that site, underrep.com. Outside of that right now, I don't. There are, there's no books, but there are papers. I know Angela Johnson had something on culturally relevant pedagogy and physics. My dissertation, you can look it up. So there, I think, yeah, those are the only two things I can think of off the top of my head. So it's a very, you know, what should I say, very novice field right now, and it's gonna blow them up eventually.
That's what we hope. And here's another question. As an instructor, I am mostly the person of color in the class. Why and how should I implement CRP?
Is this a student or a faculty?
This is a faculty and instructor.
How do you implement CRP?
Why and how?
Well, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't matter if you're the only person of color. So it's not like only for people of color. This could be cultural dynamics, could be across race, you know. So you could implement it just like anybody else would. Like just the simple way that Latson Billings said, you can implement it just like if a person was teaching with a bunch of students of color, or if you were teaching with a bunch of students of no color. Every culture has a different dynamic, and so you can adjust CRP to that dynamic.
Yeah, now that you're saying that, I'm thinking about how there's, you know, so many different cultures, even within the US context, that, you know, the South versus the North is, I think, one of the ones people often bring up.
Yeah, and you know, like a lot of people feel that, you know, it's only for, you know, students of color or something like that. Now, I say this is a way to improve the issues of underrepresentation, but, you know, it's not only for people of color, if that makes sense. You know, that's kind of what it's branded as, because the person who developed it was a person of color, but, you know, it's not only for people of color, it's for everybody can use it.
Have you seen any examples where people have used it for, I mean, you gave in some, but some that were more, you know, not particularly for people of color? Because I think the gun violence stuff was an example, but are there others?
For students of non-color?
Well, just generically students, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of it off the top of my head. There's one paper, like two papers I read, where there were some students in Alaska where some teachers were trying to use it. And there was another one where I think it was maybe Montana or something like that. It should be online. I can't remember the paper off the top of my head. I can't remember the name of the paper off the top of my head, but there are examples of that. But there are substantially more, unfortunately. There are more examples for students of color. Students of color.
Great, and I think it would be, I'm going to anticipate if you had the time to just send the bibliography things, I would love to send them out to people. And I'm actually curious about these myself.
Yeah, I definitely will.
Great, thank you. And are there any last questions? Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon/evening. I am stopping